Japan is changing its foreign policy strategy.
Now, Japan has unveiled plans for its biggest military build-up since World War II.
Japan really does see itself in a very, very difficult strategic environment.
Japan is an immediate neighbor to Russia, North Korea, China.
Japan is wary of a rising and muscular China.
And it's fortifying a new front line on its islands near Taiwan.
Japan and the United States remain united in our concern over China's destabilizing actions.
We have to start getting ready. We don't really know how much time we have.
After decades of peace, Japan faces the renewed threat of a return to the days of war. This requires a strong expansion of the army and the creation of fortifications, which are among the key objectives for the coming years. The cherry blossom country is in fact almost surrounded by enemies. Russia constantly claims the Kuril Islands, which it occupies, and bilateral relations are constant tensions and escalations in the form of controversial violations of air or sea zones. Not so long ago, just over 6 months ago, Japanese Defense Minister Nobuo Kishi, in a meeting with the heads of defense ministries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations countries, reported that Sino-Russian warships regularly sail around Japan almost all the time. Another threat that the Japanese fear most is, of course, the growing ambitions of the middle state. Here, the bilateral relationship is one of mutual distrust and historical past, similar to those between Poland and Germany. The Japanese also carried out bloody slaughters on Chinese lands and treated the people living there as if they were second class. The Japanese occupation was merciless. To understand what worries Japan, just look at a map. From the northern tip of Taiwan to Okinawa is no more than an hour's flight. The Japanese archipelago could be China's next target, Vice Prime Minister Taro Aso said. He also promised that Japan would stand alongside the U.S. in defending Taiwan.
我が国を取り巻く安全保障環境、極めて急速に厳しさを増していると感じています。我が国周辺のこの国地域においても、核ミサイル能力の強化、急速な軍備増強、力による一方的な現状変更の試みなど、こうした動きが一層顕著になっている。
Japan's latest enemy is, of course, North Korea here. About every month we hear announcements of North Korean missiles that have flown over Japan or right next to it, falling into the Sea of Japan or somewhere further out into the calm ocean. Kim has repeatedly threatened the Japanese, and with the growing nuclear threat on the Korean peninsula, this is another dangerous adversary.
これまでの弾道ミサイル等の度重なる発射も含め、一連の北朝鮮の行動は、我が国、地域及び国際社会の平和と安全を脅かすものであり、我が国を含む国際社会全体にとっての深刻な挑戦です。また、このような弾道ミサイル発射は、関連する安保理決議に違反するものです。
こうした状況を踏まえ、いわゆる反撃能力も含め、あらゆる選択肢を排除せず検討し、今後とも防衛力の抜本的な強化に取り組んで、
Tokyo also does not have an outstandingly good relationship with Seoul due to the devastation of the Korean people during World War II. To this day, they are still seeking compensation for the war. The only things the two countries have in common are common enemies and economic issues. The popular tourist destination of Ishigaki, an island closer to Taiwan than Tokyo, will soon be home to hundreds of soldiers, ammunition stocks, and missiles that could one day strike mainland China. Dozens of similar bases are currently being built, and it represents a grand plan for Japan's potential defense. That's why in today's material, we decided to take a closer look for you at how Japan is currently preparing for war. Is it real? Will Tokyo create one of the strongest armies in the world? And does a large fortification make sense? Let's find out. I invite you to continue.
現在の自衛隊の能力で我が国に対する脅威を抑止できるか、脅威が現実となったときにこの国を守り抜くことができるのか、極めて現実的なシミュレーションを行いました。率直に申し上げて、現状は十分ではありません。
Now, more than 70 years after its declaration of abandonment of war, Japan is again preparing for conflict. Some believe this strategy of deterring China could end in armed conflict. 80% of Japanese express concern that their country could become involved in a conflict between the US and China over Taiwan, with 52% of respondents emphasizing great concern. 56% of those surveyed said Japan's self-defense forces should limit their role in the conflict. At the same time, the Japanese are building the alliances necessary for survival in the event of a potential armed conflict. First among the allies to receive robust Japanese support is the Philippines.
Suddenly we are waking up to the potential threat that China is posing. And in order to face that, we're very poorly prepared. And what's more worrying is that the Americans are very poorly prepared in this region.
Japan has announced its 2023 budget for the Japan Self-Defense Forces, JSDF, of 6.8 trillion yen, $52 billion, a 26% increase in spending over 2022 and the largest nominal increase since at least 1952. This is also the first budget under Japan's new National Security Strategy, NSS, which imposes a target for defense and other spending to rise to 2% of gross domestic product, GDP, by 2027, is aimed at making the cherry blossom country one of the most militarily powerful powers. Under a defense-only policy, Japan had been limiting military spending to 1% of GDP, but with the new National Defense Strategy, there has been a dramatic shift in Japan's military policy.
Japan's new National Security Strategy, National Defense Strategy, and Defense Build-Up Program reflect the scale and scope of that transformation. I think what you're seeing in real time is an alliance that is modernizing, and the United States and Japan are working in lockstep to be prepared for the emerging challenges in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. So we could not be more pleased with the work that we're doing.
Japan already has military bases on several islands, including Hokkaido, Honshu, Shikoku, Kyushu, and Okinawa. In contrast, U.S. military bases are mainly deployed in the Okinawa archipelago. As part of its defense against China, Japan is trying to develop its self-defense forces. It plans to purchase modern military equipment, including F-35 aircraft and Patriot anti-aircraft missiles, among others. Japan is also in talks with the U.S. to purchase the THAAD missile defense system. Japan has about 1,400 ammunition depots across the country, but 70% of them are located on the northernmost island of Hokkaido, more than 2,000 kilometers from Japan's islands in the East China Sea. That doesn't solve the key problem, however, which is the Ryukyu island chain headed by Okinawa. China continues to expand its influence in the South China Sea basin. The Ryukyu archipelago, together with Taiwan, is the biggest blockade to the possibility of developing the imperial inclinations of the middle state.
現在の中国の対外的な姿勢、あるいは軍事動向等については、我が国のこの平和と安全及び国際社会の平和と安定を確保し、法の支配に基づく国際秩序を強化する上での挑戦と認識をしております。
PRC leader Xi Jinping personally made the decision last August to fire ballistic missiles into waters belonging to Japan's exclusive economic zone. It was supposed to be a gesture making things clear. If Japan joins the conflict over Taiwan, the consequences will be immediate. The Tokyo-based authorities will not let go of Taiwan and, as they themselves have stated, will help the U.S. in the event of a conflict because of their own interests in the region as well. In short, if Ben Hodges, being one of the U.S. generals, makes it clear that China will probably attack by 2025, the Japanese have no intention of idling because this conflict, whether they want it or not, will not pass them by. Clear evidence of this scenario is to be found in the fact that Japan is considering building a large evacuation shelter for all residents on the island of Okinawa. On top of that, a plan is being prepared to evacuate residents closest to potential military action. We are talking about people on the islands of Takitomi and Ishigaki, especially those living on Yonaguni Island, located just 100 kilometers from Taiwan. The Defense Ministry estimates that land forces will need about 90 additional ammunition depots over the next decade, while naval forces will need about 40 additional depots. One proposal calls for the construction of nearly 70 ammunition depots over the next 5 years, and most would be located in the Ryukyu archipelago because as of today, only 10% of all Japan's weapons are deployed there. Another concern for the Japanese is the Senkaku Islands, which were annexed by the country in 1895 and later incorporated into Okinawa Prefecture. After World War II, they were under U.S. administration, and in 1972 were, along with Okinawa, returned to Japan. The islands are the subject of a territorial dispute between Japan, China, and Taiwan. The conflict erupted in the late 1960s with the emergence of information that rich oil deposits may be located there. Today, as part of the One China policy, the Middle State notoriously sends its own warships to the vicinity of these several uninhabited islands, which are then chased away by Japanese vessels.
Japan and the United States remain united in our concern over China's destabilizing actions. And I want to reaffirm the United States' ironclad commitment to defend Japan with the full range of capabilities, including nuclear, and underscore that Article 5 of the Mutual Security Treaty applies to the Senkaku Islands.
However, this flashpoint is crucial in the years to come, because the potential seizure of these small islands by China would offer the possibility of creating a missile fortress capable of closing in on Taiwan from the Japanese side, and supplies could only be carried out from the south, which is much worse in logistics due to the steep coastal cliffs. It would then be almost impossible to defend the island. The disputed islands remain under the control of the government in Tokyo, which defines them as an integral part of Japanese territory. Japanese authorities regularly report incursions by Chinese vessels into the waters surrounding the islands, which Tokyo considers its territorial waters. The Chinese Coast Guard continues to attempt altering the established status quo around the Senkaku Islands by force or coercion. Their actions include approaching Japanese fishing boats in Japanese territorial waters and deploying ships equipped with artillery. The actions of the Chinese Coast Guard, asserting their claims in the Japanese waters around the Senkaku Islands, violate international law. The Japanese government has been expressing its concerns and challenging China's actions, urging a change in behavior through high-level channels, including the Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister. Whenever Chinese ships trespass into Japanese waters, Japanese patrol vessels demand their departure, and the government swiftly issues a strong protest to China diplomatically, insisting the ships to leave and prevent such incidents in the future. There have been more than 30 such incidents in 2022, with the first one this year occurring on January 10th. Japan regularly conducts exercises near the islands, and plans for the next few years include establishing a small military base there to secure Japanese-American interests in the region. Japan's self-defense forces have also begun construction of a new airbase on Meiji, an uninhabited island in Kagoshima Prefecture. The base is to house U.S. fighter jets transferred from the island of Iwoto, also known as Iwo Jima. According to Japanese defense officials, Meiji, located at the eastern end of the South China Sea, is a great location for a military base. If one looks at the latest map of U.S. military bases in Japan, one gets the impression that the country is prepared for as many as 3 operational zones. One of them is Ryukyu, with Okinawa at the head. Here, the main objective is the defense of Taiwan and the potential blockade of China. Kyushu and Chugoku are potential bases for supporting South Korea in a conflict with North Korea. To the north is Hokkaido, best armed and with as much as 70% of U.S. equipment. This is a backdrop from the Cold War era. Today, it is obviously a potential location from which to conduct military operations against Russia, with plans to increase Japan's armaments to 2% of the country's GDP. This, at $5 trillion a year, will translate into as much as $100 billion, which will elevate it to the ranks of the world's top 3 military powers. This will be a real game changer in global geopolitics, but it also proves that the South China Sea is one of the most explosive regions in the world. Nevertheless, this military cauldron is not enjoyed by the locals who find themselves in it.
私たち小さな力なんだけれども頑張ってるんです。ゲット白い花のカンたちや。で最近の新聞なんかだとまるで石垣島が戦場になるのがもうなんかこう日の見るより当たり前。ますます腹が立つますよね。
武器では平和は作れない。ミサイルがあるからといっ って安心安全じゃない。逆にミサイルがあるとやられる。
そう終わったはずなのに、私たちはその終戦っていうのを感じることができない、実感することができない。
As you have heard for yourself, they feel as if the war will never end there. Everyone is still living the events of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and what took place during World War II. Nothing looks likely to de-escalate there in the coming years in the face of the return of the Americans to the Philippines, the building of new bases in Japan, and the open support of Taiwan by the US against the One China policy. This clash will happen sooner or later, and it is clear that each side is preparing for such an option. Wars are an inherent part of humanity, and whenever power or priorities change, the world is rearranged. Powers have fallen and been born, and today we have two main blocks, namely the democratic one, which is not exactly ideal either, and the authoritarian one, which also has its pros and cons. The war in Ukraine is just one element of the constant clash between the major powers of this world, so only naive people can believe in long-term peace on our planet. This is a utopia that does not exist, and there has never been a time when people have not fought each other. So Japan's idea in terms of increasing security seems to make a lot of sense. Judge it for yourself in the comments. For my part, that's it for today. Keep it up. Cheers.